right, it is 13:10 on my clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first Auxin of the year, and a special welcome to our newcomers, those who have received our invitation within the university and our new LinkedIn community. I hope you will find these lunch hour conversations on teaching, learning, assessment at Stellenbosch University quite insightful. My name is Simbongile Ntwasa, but you can call me Sim. I am an advisor at the Center for Teaching and Learning, the center that's responsible for hosting Auxins for the year. I hope you have read, those who are new, I hope you have read about Auxin on our website. And if you want to see more conversations on teaching, learning, assessment, at the university from previous years, please go and hop onto our website. So for the benefit of those who are new, I'm quickly going to take you through the Auxin process. So our speaker, Dr. Hanelie Adendorff, is going to speak for about roughly 20-25 minutes, and then I'm going to hand the floor to all of you to engage her on the topic for about 15 minutes, and then I will ask for between 5 and 10 minutes to then wrap up and then make my announcements for the day. So yeah, but while Hanelie is presenting, please do feel free to communicate via our chats platform. Then in the middle of the presentation, my colleague Liesel is going to share our feedback form where we'd like you to engage us as the center and Auxins, but also Hanelie on the topic, so she can get the feedback in terms of what she has done in the presentation. So that is going to be Auxin for today and the year, I guess. So the first Auxin of 2026, it kicks off with our topic, the University, Attention and Human Deepfakes, presented by none other Dr. Hanelie Adendorff. Now, she is well known by us at the university, but I prepared a short introduction for those that may not know her. So Hanelie Adendorff is a senior advisor at the Center for Teaching and Learning. She has a PhD in chemistry, but has been working in professional development since 2002. Her career in professional development started with an interest in blended learning, but she has since included work in the area of assessment, facilitation of collaborative learning, science education, and many more activities. She's also involved in decolonization of the science curriculum conversations, and she is a member of the Faculty of Science Teaching and Learning Hub. She works with the Vice Dean Teaching and Learning to enhance the status of teaching in the faculty. And I think she has also been recently known with, can I call it an elephant in the room? And that is, artificial intelligence. And she has been quite very informative to the university in how we can look at this within teaching, learning, and assessment. So in this Auxin, she will join us in this conversation by asking what kind of graduates are we delivering into a world shaped by generative AI, optimization, and data-driven systems. So please share your thoughts with Hanelie in the chats, as well as in the feedback link that is going to be provided. Hanelie, over to you.
Thank you, Sim. After that introduction, I must say I feel almost fearful to get started. But to all of you, Thank you for making available the time this afternoon to come and join us here and to grapple with me on these really tricky topics. So as you might or might not know, this topic, what the university is or what is a university, is also the topic of this year's Stellenbosch University Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Conference in November. So what I'm hoping to do this afternoon, rather than offering definitive ideas or answers on these topics, is to open up the conversation and lead up to that conference. So I'm going to pose a number of questions, and then hopefully those will spark responses or more questions from you who are here this afternoon that we can all bring to the conference in November to grapple with together or to reflect on or to theorize. So that is my disclaimer before I get started this afternoon. I'm going to switch off my camera just in case it becomes a bandwidth issue. Now, I'm going to start the conversation this afternoon by asking you guys a question. I'm going to launch, hopefully, in another few seconds, a quick poll, which will collate your answers as a word cloud. And the question is, what is a university? You should be able to see it now, both in the chat and on screen. And you can type as many responses as you like. You type 1 or 2 words. And the idea here is not to analyze, it's not to judge. It is to see more or less where we are in the room. What are our thoughts on this topic? Because we all do have an idea, an answer to this topic, whether explicit or implicit. So I'll shut up for a moment and see what you all come up with. As these things go, well, your responses are still pouring in. Thank you for those. These are lovely. Don't you just love watching how they change? We started with knowledge production, and then there was learning, and now we sort of have learning and knowledge both there fairly prominently. I hope you've all had a time to sort of look at what's coming up here. Most of these, I think, are things that most of us here would be able to rally behind. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to change up the question a little bit. And now I'm going to ask you what is happening in practice. And for this, I'm going to launch another poll, but this time you have to select for me which from that list that I have on the screen at the moment, from what you are observing in your practice where you are, which of these things appear most visible? And again, you can select more than one, but we are not hopefully looking for all of them, but just the ones that you feel is most visible where you are situated at the moment. So is it knowledge production, graduate employability, ranking, citizenship, throughput, professional competence? What is it? Again, then as you're seeing the answers for these pouring in, again, it's not a judging exercise, it's purely mapping. I'm going to ask you to think for a moment to what degree this aligns with what you had answered on the previous slide, with what you think the university is for, and whether there's anything here on this slide that you are finding surprising. In addition, I'm going to ask you, no pressure that you have to do it, but for those people who selected other, I would be curious as to what it is that you thought were absent in the list that I had provided. I can think of things that are absent in the list once I put it together. I looked at it and I thought, oh yeah, where is this or where is that? But what is it that you put in there? And you are welcome to just post that in the chat, or if you're keen to put up a hand at this point in time and share it, you can do that as well. But I'd be really keen to know what it is that that you had wanted to see in this list, which you're seeing in your context, but which we have not captured in the list. At this point in time, it looks as if what we are most often seeing is knowledge production, to a lesser extent, graduate employability, student throughput as a big one. That is no surprise, is it? And professional competence. But yeah, keen to see what else you might have wanted to see here that is not, that we do not have in the list. Okay, moving on from there. Why this question now? So the question of university purpose is not a new one, but it has resurfaced quite sharply recently. And this tends to happen when conditions around us shift, that this question becomes more prominent again. And conditions around universities, I would argue, have shifted and might still be shifting at this point in time. And I am not here referring to what some called the elephant in the room, or the explosion of generative AI onto our shores. Various authors like Chrissy Bowie and Sue McKenna, also Liz Lange, have already spoken about changes that we are seeing in the higher education, or that we are seeing to impact the higher education sector over the past decade in various publications. So just going over them broadly quickly, we have seen changes in structural conditions. For example, universities, they argue, now operate within intensified accountability regimes. Within such regimes, performance is measured, compared, and optimized. Does any of that sound familiar to any of you? Funding and legitimacy then becomes tied to our outputs, things like research outputs, for example, or student performance outputs. Culturally, especially in this digital world that we live in now, or impacted by that, we inhabit an environment where that privileges speed and visibility and efficiency. So driven to some degree by digital systems, what we see tends to be what counts, and perfection matters. Yet at the same time, we continue to claim that universities develop responsible graduates, people who are capable of acting thoughtfully and ethically in society. And I think those claims within this structure creates a tension that is worth examining for us. Well, for me, the question would become, what kind of learning happens at such speed and efficiency? So I'm going to drill a little deeper into what some of these authors are saying over the next 3 slides, just to sort of set the scene of what this moment is that we are in. What is the shift which they claim is happening in society, and that we are just responding to, that universities are taking on board to some degree. I think our late senior director, Professor Liz Lange, who also proposed the title for the Total Conference, had critiqued universities in just following what's happening around them and not questioning that. So Bowie and McKenna, in their 3-book, Understanding Higher Education Alternative Perspectives, argue that we are seeing massification without proportional resourcing. We're seeing an intensification in accountability. We're seeing a centrality of performance measurement, and we are seeing technocratic indicators used to measure things such as social justice goals. Together with this, then teaching and learning are reframed as output systems, and the complexity of educational transformation of learning is reduced to measurable proxies, a test, an exam, an essay. Or put differently, social justice and equity agendas become absorbed into performance metrics. They become tick lists that we can tick off. Reporting becomes mechanical rather than developmental. I don't need to say more on that. And teaching and learning are increasingly evaluated through numeric indicators. That also is quite familiar to us. And in this context, the complexity of epistemic access, of our students grappling with the things that we are trying to induct and introduce them into, is flattened into throughput and pass rates. In other words, what counts becomes what can be counted. If We look at Stellenbosch University, we say that we are learning focused. Learning is in the center of our activities. And we specifically speak about learning that transforms or transformative learning. For the purpose of this discussion this afternoon, I'm going to draw on Quinlan's 2014 definition, where she sees learning as a change in a person. And she holds that this is not only about gaining knowledge and skills, but also growing emotionally, spiritually, and morally as embedded people in society. I think that is a huge claim for us in higher education to have to live up to. So what is this moment that we are in? Drawing on thinkers like Stigler and Heidegger, Liz Lange argues that digital technologies reshape not only how we do things, but literally how we experience ourselves. In an era where attention is captured and desire is externally directed, identity becomes performance. Think about social media and the impact that it has on us and especially younger generations and how they form their identity and what matters, the importance of likes, of clicks, of followers. When everything, including ourselves, is revealed as measurable and optimizable, the slow work of becoming becomes fragile. What we are seeing is that attention has become commodified. We have various social media apps competing for our attention. Liz writes in her paper called Rethinking the University that you might be busy with one activity, and this is familiar to all of us, our experience daily. I'm trying to read something on my phone or my computer screen when a notification from LinkedIn pops up, and as soon as I close that, YouTube is suggesting something I should be watching. So just keeping my attention, just withdrawing long enough to focus on that one thing becomes increasingly difficult. In addition to this, Liz Lange writes, and I'm going to quote her verbatim because I think her words here are important, that social digital technologies in this way prevents us from exercising our capacity to know, because the algorithm always takes us to the place where we want to be, to the idea that we do not want contradicted. Secondly, she says, it prevents us from exercising the right to differ. Cancel culture, she argues, is a tragic example of digital intolerance and group thinking. And lastly, she says that it obliterates, outside of social media campaigns, the development of politics that are based on argument and consensus. And Liz, I think here was really embodied this ability to still have argument and come to consensus, even in cases where she differed. Digital technologies thus industrialize intention. They short-circuit the slow process by which we become. Stigler argues that our becoming a person is interrupted by these kinds of technologies. He draws on Heidegger here. And instead of developing, he says, an interior depth, individuals are constantly stimulated then and externally oriented. For Stigler, this leads to our thinking capacities being automated or displaced. Carl Mayton, talking about knower development in knowledge structures as that process of becoming, of developing attributes that are sought after in a specific context. He talks about knower development as a slow process of immersion that requires time, grappling, and sustained attention. Learning that transforms thus require attention, but attention has become something competed for in our context. Here I find it interesting to go back briefly to the past and look at the medieval university specifically, not to romanticize it nor to gloss over the failures and ills of that came out of that time period, but just to see how they thought about this process of becoming. And what's interesting at that time is that the university process, higher education process, started with this developing the ability to think, to reason, to ask questions, to make judgments, which was called or taught through the trivium that consisted of trivium, 3 subject areas, grammar, as mastery of language as a system of meaning making, logic, the ability to reason, etc., and rhetoric, how to persuade, hopefully responsibly, etc. Only once this was mastered, a student moved on to what was called the quadrivium, the 4 subjects that presented principled knowledge mostly based in mathematics, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. All of these understood mathematically, yes, even music was understood as mathematical relationships, not as performance in this specific context. Once the trivium and quadrivium was completed, then the student could move on to higher studies. And in that specific period of time, these were mostly law, medicine, and theology. My question then becomes, what is it that if we now compare to that, where are we? What are we prioritizing? In what order are we presenting what to our students today? And I think if I look around me, and this would be interesting to hear what you guys are seeing, I think we begin by teaching techniques and tools, how to write, how to construct a paragraph or an essay, how to structure an argument, how to calculate, how to apply a specific method to achieve a specific outcome. So we teach the students the tools of the trade first, and then we look at the outputs that they create with these tools as a form of performance. And with these tools or with these techniques. And this is what we then measure or what we assess in order to credential them as signals of or we see the outputs created through these tools then as signals of employability or readiness for the workplace. This picture is quite different, although you might differ from me, from the one of the medieval university. And I wonder within this picture, where is it that we develop that opportunity for becoming, for changing, for transforming? Is it embedded in everything that we do? Is it added on top of the things that we do? Or is it assumed that if my students learn the principled knowledge, that will follow by implication? I'm going to leave that question open to you at this point in time. So drilling a little deeper into where we are in higher education specifically at this point in time, my colleagues Nicoline Herman and Deline Hubert and I, in a book chapter, used the futures thinking methodology called causal layered analysis to look at the university or higher education at this moment in time. Causal layered analysis looks at an entity through 4 layers. The first layer is the litany, that which is visible to all of us. And then the systems that create that which is visible to all of us. Then the worldview, 1 layer deeper, that sustains or keeps in place the system that results in the litany. And finally, the metaphor or myth level, which is the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of what's going on around us. Usually, in a causal layered analysis approach, this will be followed by creating a new story that we can all rally behind. But for the purpose of this discussion this afternoon, I'm going to stop short of that and just show you when we reflected on and read about what we see around us and what other authors are saying, what do we think is going on here? And I'd be really curious to hear what it is that you guys are seeing. So what we saw would be things like throughput pressures, concerns about AI cheating, detecting AI writing, concerns about AI and student learning, concerns about student engagement or disengagement, shortened student attention spans, students just wanting the answer. There's graduate employability concerns, and then workload overload and burnout for staff and for students. I think, in short, we can summarize it probably as something like concerns about learning being in decline, concerns about students being distracted, and a feeling that technology is a problem. So this is not a value-based judgment from our side. This is just saying what I'm seeing when I read things like University World News, The Conversation, and more informal social media spaces. So what are the systems that might be leading to these kinds of things that we are seeing? Metrics, ranking, and efficiency, I think, are the key things at this point in time that our systems run on. So funding is linked to outputs, things like student success, student completion, student retention, researched outputs, citation indices, etc. Learning analytics that quantify behavior, efficiency, compressing everything for efficiency, doing more with less, which causes time pressures for academics, for students. And in the words of a PhD by an author called Auxin, quite ironically, because he looked at Heidegger's work or used that, Auxin argues that education is now making measuring humanity its central and most important work. If it can't be counted, it does not count. Sounds similar to what we heard earlier from McKenna and Bowie. So what is the worldview we think that underpins a lot of our systems or hold them in place in higher education, besides what comes from neoliberalism and all those things that we're familiar with? We feel that what we are also seeing here is a dominance of the ethic of justice. Now, the ethic of justice in itself is not a bad thing. It actually is quite a good thing. It focuses on things like fairness, equality, and consistency through rules to ensure that these good things happen. The risk with a dominance or only focusing on the ethic of justice is that we become dehumanized, that we become entities that can be measured and controlled through rules. And think, for example, something like using the results of analytics without human intervention to contextualize those in specific cases. I think we can all think of examples where that might be problematic. The paradox we think we're facing here is that higher education promises the products of a postmodern ethic of care, while we build our systems around sorting, control, and sameness. And then lastly, what are the stories we tell ourselves? So here I want to share two stories that are both equally concerning to me, and they might sound familiar to you or not. The one is we often hear as the student as client. If the student is our client, and the client is always right, what does that say about satisfaction and the service we deliver and how students respond to that? In the student as client story, the university becomes like a shop. Assessment becomes a receipt, a proof of purchase, and learning becomes transactional. The other story that is quite common in literature as well as the university is a factory. And though we wouldn't normally go around calling it that, we do speak about things like delivering graduates to the workplace, or talking of graduates as products of what happens at the university. So in this university as factory metaphor, students move along a production line where our tests ensure that standards are met and assessment become product inspection, quality control before certification. In this picture, learning is passive. Neither of these pictures obviously are what we are after, at least not what that first slide where you told me what you thought the university was for, at least not what we are espousing in that or hoping for in that. So when we teach principled knowledge and reward performance and assume that transformation will follow, or maybe we don't do, what are we credentialing? That would be my question. So my colleagues and I here invoke the idea of the human deepfakes, and now we get to that part of the title. A deepfake would be, in my shorthand version of it, or definition of it, would be a machined version of a human. Quite recently, there was quite a flurry of activity on the internet after a video of Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt fighting surfaced somewhere. This never happened. It was an AI generated video. That's an example of a deepfake. But what is a human deepfake? If a deepfake is a machined version of a human, doesn't really exist, it was created by a machine, then a human deepfake is a human version of a machine. My shorthand again. This is when we deliver graduates through a factory line that act like machines, that can do what machines can do. And this is something that the ethic of justice creates a risk for. Because humans that act like machines will never be able to compete machines. They will usually, we are being told, be outperformed by machines, especially in the AI-infused generation. Why does this matter? John Lennox, emeritus mathematics professor from Oxford University, tells us that he's not afraid of machines becoming like humans. He says, I'm afraid of humans becoming like machines. To me, this matters because I care about higher education's purpose. I care about the kinds of graduates that we are forming, and I care about sustaining intellectual development in accelerated times. At first, on the slide I had, we care about these three things. And then I remembered how upset I get when the university decides on my behalf what it is that I care about without having consulted me. So I thought I'd change the slide to what I care about, and then I'll ask you, what is it that you care about? Why does this matter to you, if it does? And I will end this presentation, or this quick introduction, with a question to you again, but I'm not going to post a poll or a word cloud this time. I'm going to ask you to reflect on that, and maybe we can discuss that when we open for input now. In 2026, what must universities intentionally protect and why? What is it that we should care about enough to protect? What should we be for in 2026? That is my input. So we are, I see that Sim has left, so I'm going to open the floor. I'm not sure that I'm opening the floor for questions. I don't think I'm enough of an expert to answer any questions on this topic, but I am open for taking your comments, suggestions, and inputs and ideas. So please feel free to put up a hand to post in the chat. I will have a look at the chat now, and I will ask my colleagues in the meeting to also scan it for me in case I miss some things.
Still here, Hanelie.
Are you still here,
Wow.
Sim?
Yes, yes.
Fantastic. I'm so glad.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hanelie, for that presentation. It's a lot, and I enjoyed how you linked, the purpose of university before. And I think that was some of the stuff that you shared was new to me. And yeah, and then taking us, where we are currently. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave my questions for later and perhaps start with the colleagues. If there's anyone who has any question, you can please put your hand up. But in the meantime, while you're thinking, Debbie wrote a comment saying she thinks reflecting on why the ancient university taught maths, music, rhetoric is critical, developing critical citizens, advancing society rather than being able to. She is responding to the original purposes, if I can put it that way, of university and why it was important. Debbie, do you want to say something? Give an opportunity to Prof. Arnold then.
Thanks so much, Sim. Thanks so much, Hanelie. I don't know so much as I have a question. I guess as a question, it's like my head is full of so many things. But I guess the question is, I don't know, how do we beat the system? Like, I think so many of us are in agreement of what the right way to do things is. Okay, maybe we're not. I think I think some people would disagree with the way I want to do things, but I think our intentions are always, I think, are good, particularly those of us who are deeply affected by teaching and wanting to see students grow and wanting to do things like that. But yet, at the same time, like we are basically under pressure to, well, if your pass rate is low, there's something wrong with you, type of thing. And, if you're not meeting these metrics, and yet, so we speak about these metrics, we speak about all these things, but it almost feels like we're powerless to actually get out of this cycle, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, Gareth, that's the difficulty, and that's why these topics are frustrating to deal with, because they are not simple answers. I also don't want to pay lip service. I do think that I read Quinlan again in preparation for this, who argues strongly about our leadership, not as positional, but that each of us in those spaces in which we are placed can take leadership to make changes in the small, in your pedagogy and how you approach what you do with your students. But what the late Professor Lange argues in Rethinking the University is that we're always going to fall short if we look at the university just on its own, even in this, and we don't look at where we are as a society, what this moment in time is, which is what she's trying to do. So I think this is what the SOTL conference is going to try and do, is open a space where we can grapple a little bit more with this, and you guys can make it a lot more practical in terms of what this translates to in your specific practice. What's it looking like in your classroom space when these things compete one with the other? Some of the questions that I have been battling with a really long time is, whereas students have time to really sit and think and grapple, in intending to help them, we are making curricula fuller and fuller, and we are really playing, and I think that was part of Liz's argument, into this bigger system of just playing along with it rather than critiquing it. I wish I had answers. I think you are right on that. If we be caught in a system, and we've got to try and figure out how we critique it, and whether we can move out of it even slightly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question or comment, Prof. Gareth. Debbie, I saw your hand was up. Do you want to try again?
Okay, I can try again. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, good. So I was thinking, so what must we intentionally protect? I think we must, also realize that there's a lot of academics who do want to preserve that development of the person as a whole through different disciplines. That approach, there's a lot of people who realize the value in that and who want to preserve that. And I think that is something that we do need to protect, and we need to push back against industry who wants us to produce these human machines. But what would be good is maybe we can, at SOTL, have an industry panel where we've got some people from industry, big hirers, people who are hiring our graduates, and discuss with them what they see the purpose of, what they got from their university education, what they see the purpose of the university education is, what their frustrations are. Because, for the people that I have discussions with from industry who say to me in the context of engineering, how can you not teach your students this? How can you not teach your students that? Then when you actually have the discussion with them of that's not something, you're not going to teach an engineer how to do one very specific type of coding at university. You are going to teach them computational thinking through an example of one type of code, so that they can then go and quickly upskill themselves on whatever code that particular industry is using. And that perspective, once you bring that to industry, then they kind of recognize that boundary of, where the boundary sits between what they, and I think they just basically are projecting their frustrations with the amount of work that they have to do and how much upskilling is needed, because there are so many tools that are used in industry. They're just projecting that back onto the universities because they don't want to have to deal with the problem, but it's also not our problem. So I think, an open dialogue where there is an acknowledgement of the frustration and an acknowledgement that there is this kind of no man's zone in between the bachelor graduate and the job ready professional. Just acknowledging that there is that gap. And okay, last thing I'm going to say is, yesterday I gave one of the dean's lectures to first year engineering students, and the topic that we were discussing is what motivates you to study, and we did this within the context of self-determination theory. And so the students were great, they were engaging in everything, and so one student said, but what's wrong with wanting to study just so that I can get a degree and get a job? So and so then when I said to the class, look, it's hopefully going to take you 4 years to get this degree. That's 4 years of your life. And then you step into the next 30 to 40 years of your life being an engineer and doing that job day after day. And if your focus is purely on passing exams and getting a job, you're not going to be passing exams anymore once you've finished. Well, maybe some of them will, but in the context of this discussion, and there's no more formalized assessment like that. But you do have to find some inner joy, some job satisfaction in doing that job every day. And just having a job and being able to pay bills is going to get old very quickly, as you see by many people who are not happy in their jobs. Anyway, they all looked at me, and I realized when I took 30 or 40 years into the future, they haven't even lived 30 years. So it's like impossible for them to imagine that far into the future. But yeah, so I think I think we do bring these holistic aspects into the curriculum. I think there's a lot of us who are doing that, and that every year we've got to remind the students that it's not just about these 3 or 4 years at varsity, because that's outside of what is in their brains. So we do have to open up their minds into a life beyond university and beyond pleasing their parents and getting good marks and being labeled as a top performer, but I do think we are doing it. So I think we need to keep the pressure on, that we don't slip further into this, whatever, managerialism or productivism or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But I also think that it's worthwhile to acknowledge how people have been fighting this fight for decades, and we still are fighting this fight. And we need to keep on fighting the fight because it's important.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I was actually, initially, my final slide was going to be ask what you're already doing, but I didn't want to put pressure on people. You have to define it so tightly to know what exactly you're asking at that point in time. But I do also want to acknowledge that I know a lot of people are doing this, and they're doing it really explicitly with students to try and develop these other things beyond just the knowledge. Claudia's in the audience, I know, so Claudia will, I'm sure, take on board that suggestion you made. You made me think that it becomes more important, I think, for us as higher education to engage with our stakeholders out there as we position or reposition ourselves, because it seems over a period of time we've tried to become everything to everyone. I remember Professor Johannes Cronje from UWC once saying the very same thing you are saying, that his answer to industry is, if I were to train the student for your specific industry, I am training them out of being employable in all the other industries that are potentials for them. And then maybe, Debbie, just one more thing from me, what I thought of earlier when you asked that question about why the teaching in trivium and quadrivium as it was. When I was researching that a little bit, I asked ChatGPT where it thought AI would excel within trivium and quadrivium, and it said that AI excels in the trivium. AI excels in the principled knowledge space. That's its happy place. It is less comfortable in the quadrivium, which is about thinking, reasoning, and judgment. That was just its understanding of it, but it is, I think, a little bit of what we are seeing and why we are so concerned with that element of this moment of time that we are in.
Yeah, I actually, that reminds me that I was thinking exactly of what you just said now, in that I know that in a lot of industries that are tech focused, there's immense panic about people being worked out of jobs because of AI. And I think that now it becomes more critical than ever for universities to focus on that critical thinking, quadrivium, whatever space, because AI can do the task-based things. Mm-hmm. It can do maths. It can write a nice essay. It can do this. It can do that. But it's the criticality and the thinking and that is required.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, colleagues, is there anyone else? I didn't see a hand up, but in the one of the comments or two that I've seen are from Prof. Titus Dawson, where she says, I think that we need to prevent falling into the instrumentalist trap as a university. Are we graduating students for the sake of numbers, stakeholders and industry, or are we here to generate knowledge? Then down at the bottom, she continues to say, in the book, The Good University, they argue that universities should not be driven by market competition, rankings, and the corporate staff, but by social and public good. And I think Debbie has spoken extensively about her experience with students. And I wanted to add to what you were saying, Debbie. I get the same impression from, parents when I tell them the purpose, what university is about, and what our job is to have students who are critical of, society for the benefit of society. And they look at me with very strange faces because they just want their children to get a job, after they graduate. And one of my questions, or what I was interested in, Hanelie, when you were presenting the causal layered analysis, because it became very clear that the efficiency discourse that is what is it triggered or influenced by the big neoliberalism that we live under is actually what has now conditioned us as the universities to also respond to this neoliberal push. And that seems to be bigger than the university. And I wonder, this is something that you don't need to answer, but I always wonder to what extent do external powers change the purposes of, universities? And if university it's on itself is powerful enough to resist those, those global powers. I'm talking about politics, capitalism, etc., etc. And if we have, the power.
Yeah, that maybe is the big question. And it has so many sides to it, but I think it is what Liz is calling for us to at least grapple with in rethinking the university, where a little bit of her argument at least is that she's cautioning us not just to take on board what's happening in society and not to assume that if society bows to certain things and if digital pressures cause certain things in society, that is a higher education. We just respond by saying, well, this is the reality. We just have to do the same, but that we really apply our critical thinking skills and critique and question this.
Yeah. Colleagues, thank you so much for coming to this session and engaging us on this, huge topic. Yeah, so we're going to end it here. Hanelie, thank you so much for kick-starting our Auxins for the year. So we're going to keep within this theme, which is a subtle linked theme on what is a university for. So a lot of colleagues who are going to come and deliberate on this topic will be focused on what they have done or what they are currently researching in a way to try and respond to this question. So yeah, thank you so much for having us or for coming in today. We will see you in the next Auxin. Please make sure you also provide Hanelie feedback and you continue the conversation online. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.